I was just trying to watch a movie. That was it. But the kid behind me wouldn't quit. He kept kicking the back of my seat. A rhythmic, dull thud that was slowly driving a wedge into my sanity. Then came the smell of stale cheese and sweat. As he propped his bare foot right next to my ear, I snapped. I turned around, my voice tight. Hey, keep your feet down and sit still. He didn't listen. Instead, he grinned, a feral little look in his eyes, and jammed a needle into the side of my neck. It wasn't a poke, it was a stab. Sharp, white hot. Pain flared instantly. I slapped a hand to my neck and pulled it away, slick with warm blood. Behind him, his mother just giggled. Oh, relax, she said, waving a hand dismissively. He's just playing with my sewing needle. Boys will be boys. It's not like it's poisoned or anything. Don't be such a drama queen. That did it. I threw my bucket of popcorn to the floor, ripped out my phone, and blasted the flashlight right into the kid's face. Listen to me, I screamed, my voice tearing through the theater's darkness. That kid is holding a high-risk medical-grade needle. It's used. It's filthy. That is HIV-positive blood. The beam of my flashlight caught the needle in the kid's hand. A single drop of blood hung from the tip. Holy shit. HIV. Someone yelled. Run. Don't let him touch you. Panic is contagious. In seconds, the theater erupted. People vaulted over seats, screaming, scrambling away from the epicenter of infection. The room descended into absolute chaos. Woman's smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer defensive fury. What the hell are you saying? HIV? She stood up, screeching. You're cursing my son? I'll rip your face off. I took a step back, my phone camera, already rolling, locked onto the kid, who was now looking confused, still clutching the weapon. Stay back, I yelled, addressing the crowd. Nobody knows if they have more needles. Call 911 now. This is assault with a deadly weapon. They are spreading a biohazard. Block the doors. Don't let them leave. My hysteria was calculated, and it worked. The fear of contagion is primal. Several large men immediately moved to block the exits, their faces grim. Yeah, nobody's going anywhere. That is sick. Stabbing people with AIDS needles. You people are monsters. Suddenly, the house lights flooded on, bathing us all in a harsh, exposing glare. The woman finally realized the gravity of the situation. She saw the rage and terror in the eyes surrounding her, and snatched her son into a protective hug. What are you doing? You're bullying a mother and child. She shrieked, though her voice wavered. It's not AIDS. It's red ink. It's just red ink. I stared at her. I looked at her with the cold, dead eyes of someone who has already imagined their own funeral. Red ink. I stepped forward. Okay, then tell your son to stab himself with it. The theater went silent. If he sticks that needle into his own arm right now, I will get on my knees and beg for your forgiveness. The woman choked. She looked at the jagged, bloody needle, then instinctively shoved her son behind her back. Why should I? You aren't touching my son. You're crazy. Adrenaline began to crash, replaced by a wave of dizziness. My knees felt weak. Behind the woman's screeching defenses, the kid finally realized he wasn't in charge anymore. Mommy, they're being mean to me, he wailed. He threw the needle down. The bloody instrument skittered across the concrete floor, rolling twice before coming to a stop in the middle of the aisle. The crowd recoiled as if the object were radioactive. No one dared to breathe near it. Don't cry, baby. Don't cry, the woman cooed, glaring at me with venomous hatred. You piece of trash. Scaring a child like that. It's a tiny scratch. You're blowing this way out of proportion. You want to call the cops? Fine. Call them. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll sue you for every penny you have. She was still posturing, still pretending she held the cards. But against the tidal wave of public panic, her entitlement meant nothing. It only fueled the fire. Shut up, lady. Your kid stabbed someone. That's a biohazard that kills people. I saw it. He was kicking the seat, and then he attacked her. That kid is a psychopath. The theater manager burst in, flanked by security guards, sweating profusely. What is going on? Everyone please remain calm. I kept my hand over the wound on my neck and walked straight up to the manager. I pulled my hand away to show him the blood. That child used that needle to puncture my carotid artery area. I have reason to believe it is medical waste, carrying a high-risk virus. I said, my voice trembling, but my logic razor sharp. I am demanding you lock down this theater. Detain them, call the police. Call an ambulance and get the CDC involved. The manager looked at the needle on the floor, then at the blood on my neck. All color drained from his face. He knew that if this was mishandled, his theater and his career was over. Cover that object. Don't touch it. He barked at security. And keep those two here. Nobody leaves. Realizing she was trapped, the woman, Vanessa, dropped to the floor in a full-blown tantrum. Help! Security is assaulting us. She screamed, kicking her legs. Is there no law in this country? You're bullying a woman and a child. Do you know who my husband is? My husband is Conrad Hughes. You touch me and he'll destroy you. Conrad Hughes? The manager flinched. The name clearly rang a bell. But the crowd didn't care about local celebrities. I don't care. If your husband is the president, someone shouted. Attempted murder is attempted murder. Record her. Put this on TikTok. Expose them. Dozens of phones were aimed at her like weapons. Flashes popped. Vanessa panicked, trying to shield her face, and swatted the cameras. Stop filming. You don't have my permission. Put the phones down. It was anarchy. I stood off to the side, the burning sensation in my neck spreading. The phantom feeling of a virus coursing through my veins made me shudder, but I had to hold it together. I focused on the needle. It wasn't a sewing needle. It wasn't even a standard syringe. The gauge was thick and the barrel had specific blue graduation lines. It looked industrial or experimental. I was a bio major back in college. I knew lab equipment. That device didn't belong in a sewing kit. It belonged in a bio waste bin. She was lying, and judging by the sweat on her brow, she was terrified. 10 minutes later, the sirens wailed outside. Police officers pushed through the crowd. An older officer, Detective Miller, took charge. Who called it in? What's the situation? I stepped forward and gave my statement, keeping it clinical. Miller put on gloves and crouched over the needle. He sealed it in an evidence bag, examining the residue inside the barrel. His brow furrowed. This isn't a sewing needle, Miller said, his voice carrying through the quiet room. This is a large bore biopsy or aspiration. Needle, veterinary or specialized use. His words hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Her sewing needle defense evaporated instantly. Veterinary, she stammered, sweat beading on her forehead. No, I bought it at a flea market for crafts. Her eyes darted around the room. She was crumbling. We'll check the prints and run a talk screen on the residue, Miller said dryly. Ma'am, you're coming with us. 2 officers hoisted her up. I'm not going. You can't arrest me. My son is a minor. She shrieked. The kid, Jackson, seeing his mother restrained, finally broke down into genuine, snot-nosed sobbing. The malicious bravado was gone. I followed the police out. As I passed them, I stopped. I leaned in close to Vanessa, my voice a whisper only she could hear. Pray, I said. Pray that it's just red ink. Because if there is anything in that needle, I will make sure your family rots in a cell. She looked up at me, eyes filled with pure venom. You just wait. Conrad is coming. When he gets here, you'll be begging me to settle. I forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. Settle? Lady, if that needle is clean, I'll eat it. But if it's dirty, God himself couldn't save you. I walked out into the daylight. The sun was blinding, but I felt freezing cold, bone deep. The ambulance was waiting. As the paramedics cleaned the wound, the smell of antiseptic cleared my head, but my mind was stuck on the needle. Those blue lines, dark red residue, and the name Conrad Hughes. If I remembered correctly, he was the CEO of Mercy Hill Medical Group, the biggest private healthcare conglomerate in the state, a hospital tycoon. His son walks around with a specialized puncture needle. His wife acts like she owns the law. This wasn't just a bratty kid. What was in that needle? A terrifying thought began to take shape in the back of my mind. Maybe I hadn't just been exposed to a disease. Maybe I had stumbled into something much darker. Something that went deeper than a prick on the neck. The air in the interrogation room at the precinct was thick enough to choke on. I had a bandage on my neck and a preliminary lab report in my hand. I was on PEP post-exposure prophylaxis. The doctor said the critical window was 72 hours. These 72 hours were my lifeline. Vanessa was sitting opposite me, legs crossed, checking her nails. The kid, Jackson, was slurping a juice box the cops had given him, staring at me with that same dead-eyed defiance. All right, let's cut the act, Vanessa said, dropping her Hermes bag onto the metal table with a heavy thud. You want money? Just say it. $5,000. Is that enough? Take the check, sign the NDA and the waiver, and we're done. I pulled out a checkbook, her pen hovering, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I didn't blink. I just crinkled the medical report in my fist. Too low. Fine. $10,000. Don't be greedy, sweetie. That's probably more than you make in a year serving coffee. Or whatever you do. Take it. Buy yourself some vitamins and stop pretending you're dying. He scribbled a number, ripped the check out, and flicked it across the table. The check fluttered through the air and landed on my shoe. I didn't move. I just stared at the piece of paper. I don't want your money, I said, My voice raspy. I want the truth. Where did that needle come from, and what was inside it? Vanessa's face twitched, masking fear with aggression. None of your business. I told you, it's a toy. We found it. The cops haven't found anything yet. So, who do you think you are? I'm warning you, don't push your luck. When my husband gets here, that 10 grand is off the table. As if on cue, the door swung open. A man in a bespoke suit strode in, bringing a cold gust of air with him. He was flanked by 2 sharp-eyed lawyers carrying briefcases. Conrad Hughes. He radiated power and arrogance. He had the heavy, fleshy face of a man who hasn't heard the word no in decades. Honey, you're finally here. Vanessa immediately switched into victim mode, crying fake tears. This person is bullying us. They want to put Jackson in jail.
Do something.
Conrad patted her shoulder, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on me. He looked at me with the detached boredom of a man inspecting a pest. You must be the victim. He walked over, towering over me. Listen,
Kid.
accidents happen. Boys play rough. I'll cover your medical bills, and I'll add 20,000 for your emotional distress. This ends now. It wasn't an offer. It was a command. One of the lawyers immediately slid a settlement agreement across the table. Sign here. It's in everyone's best interest. Conrad lit a cigarette, completely ignoring the no smoking sign on the wall. The young officer in the corner opened his mouth to object, but Conrad shot him a look that silenced him instantly. Money talks. And here it was screaming. I looked at this family. The entitlement, the cruelty, the absolute certainty that they could buy their way out of physical assault. The rage inside me burned hotter than the infection.
Fear.
And if I don't sign? I looked up, meeting Conrad's gaze. He paused, smoke curling from his lips. He seemed genuinely surprised I was speaking. He leaned in, exhaling the smoke right into my face. You don't sign, he smiled. A shark smile.
Kid.
Do you know who I am? I run Mercy Hill. I own half the city council. I can make sure you never work in this town again. I can make sure you get evicted by the end of the week. He lowered his voice to a whisper. The police won't find anything on that needle. Even if they do, it's just medical waste. A misdemeanor. I pay you off. Maybe spend an hour in holding. But if you refuse, I promise you, you will regret it for the rest of your miserable life. A naked threat. He didn't care if the needle was toxic. He only cared about the inconvenience. To him, my life was a rounding error. My fingernails dug into my palms until they bled. The pain kept me focused. Big words. Dr. Hughes. I stood up, picked up the $20,000 check, and ripped it into confetti. I threw the pieces in his face.
Keep the money.
Use it to buy your son a conscience. Or a lawyer for the murder trial. I don't believe you own the whole world. And I don't believe that needle is just trash. Conrad's face turned a violent shade of purple. He raised his hand as if to backhand me. You ungrateful little. Knock, knock.
The door opened again.
A forensic technician in a white coat walked in holding a report. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Vanessa or Jackson. He walked straight past Conrad's $6,000 suit and handed the clipboard directly to Detective Miller. Detective, the tech said, his voice dropping an octave, tight and strained. You need to see this right now. And you need to lock the doors. Miller frowned, his bushy eyebrows knitting together as he scanned the paper. I watched the veteran cop's face. Usually, guys like him had faces made of concrete, unreadable, weathered by years of domestic disputes and petty theft. But as his eyes darted across the chemical breakdown, the concrete cracked. His skin went the color of old ash. Are you absolutely sure about this, Davis? Miller asked quietly. I ran it 3 times, the tech whispered. The sequencer threw an error the first 2 because it didn't recognize the protein structures. It's not standard pathology. It's synthetic. A prion-based neuronecrotic agent.
Live.
Highly concentrated. Conrad let out a harsh, theatrical bark of laughter. What is this nonsense?
Prion?
You're telling me my 7-year-old son is walking around with weapons-grade biological material? I'm calling the chief of police. You people are incompetent. He reached into his breast pocket for his phone. Don't touch that phone, Mr. Hughes, Miller snapped, his hand instinctively dropping to rest on the butt of his service weapon. The shift in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous. It went from a tense legal dispute to a hostage situation. Conrad froze, his eyes narrowing. Excuse me? Miller ignored him. He looked at the forensic tech. Davis, initiate protocol code black. Nobody leaves this precinct. Shut down the HVAC system. Get the state hazmat team on the horn, not the local boys. Tell them we have a level 4 biohazard. Level 4. Vanessa squeaked, her voice trembling. The arrogance was melting off her face like wax. She looked at her son, who was blissfully oblivious, chewing on the straw of his juice box. Wait, I said, the burning sensation in my neck suddenly feeling like a branding iron. The room started to tilt. What do you mean, neuronecrotic? What was in that needle? Miller finally looked at me, and the pity in his eyes was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his gaze to Conrad. The vial attached to that specialized aspiration needle, Miller said, reading from the report, contains a proprietary chromosomal tag. A watermark, essentially, belonging to Apex Biosolutions, a shadow subsidiary of Mercy Hill Medical Group. Your company, Mr. Hughes. Silence slammed into the room. Conrad's face went completely blank. The flushed, purple rage from moments ago vanished, replaced by a terrifying, statuesque stillness. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head to look at his wife. Vanessa, Conrad said.
His voice didn't boom this time.
It was a razor-thin whisper. Where, exactly, did Jackson find that needle? Vanessa shrank back into her chair, clutching her Hermes bag like a shield. I told you, I found it in your private study at home. In the locked mini-fridge. I thought it was just your B12 injections. He likes playing doctor, Conrad. He threw a tantrum, so I let him keep it to quiet him down before the movie. You let him play with a locked syringe from my cold storage safe? Conrad's voice cracked. It was just red ink, she wailed, tears finally spilling over her heavy mascara. It looked like ink. It's not ink, you stupid bitch, Conrad hissed, entirely abandoning his polished persona. It's strain 73. The kid, Jackson, dropped his juice box. It splattered onto the linoleum. Daddy, don't yell at mommy. Strain 73? I repeated, my voice sounding incredibly far away. My fingertips were going numb. What is strain 73? Conrad didn't look at me. He was breathing heavily, panic finally breaching his fortress of wealth and power. I need my phone. I need to call my extraction team. We don't have much time. You aren't calling anyone, Miller growled. You're under arrest. All of you. You don't understand. Conrad yelled, lunging toward the table. The two lawyers stepped back, suddenly realizing their paychecks weren't worth dying for. If that needle was compromised, everyone in this room is dead. That pathogen doesn't just need blood contact. If it dries, it aerosolizes. If Jackson squeezed it, if it dripped. I remembered the drop of blood hanging from the needle in the flashlight beam. I remembered Jackson throwing the needle onto the concrete floor of the theater. The weight rolled. The residue. My stomach plummeted. The theater. There were 200 people in that room. It dripped, I whispered. Conrad pressed his hands against his face, a raw sound of despair tearing from his throat. Not for me. Not for the theater. For himself. He was trapped in this room with us. Before anyone could say another word, the fire alarm in the precinct blared. But it wasn't the standard loud honk. It was a high-pitched, oscillating siren. The automated voice of the emergency system kicked in over the intercoms. Hazmat lockdown. Sealing all exits. HVAC secured. Please remain calm. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the small window of the interrogation room door. We were entombed. 2 hours passed. 2 hours of suffocating, sweltering heat in a 10 by 10 room. The physical symptoms hit me first. It started as a phantom itch behind my eyes, slowly crawling down my spine. My vision occasionally blurred, the edges of the room tinged with a sickly yellow hue. The pet pills the hospital had given me for HIV were completely useless against an engineered bioweapon. I was a ticking clock. Vanessa was curled in the corner, sobbing hysterically. Jackson was crying too, complaining that his tummy hurt. Conrad paced the room like a caged tiger, muttering to himself, ignoring his family entirely. Miller sat across from me. He had taken off his jacket. His gun was resting on the table. He hadn't taken his eyes off Conrad. So, I rasped, my throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper. Strain 73. Let's hear it, Conrad. Since we're all going to die in here. Conrad stopped pacing. He looked at me, a sneer curling his lip, but the fear in his eyes undercut it. You wouldn't understand the science. Try me. I majored in biology before I realized I hated laboratories. Give me the dumbed-down version. Conrad looked at Miller's gun, then at the steel shutter. He knew his lawyers couldn't save him. He sighed, a shaky, exhausted sound. Mercy Hill isn't just a hospital network. We're a pharmaceutical research hub, Conrad said, his voice hollow. You can't cure a disease until you understand exactly how it destroys the body. Strain 73 was supposed to be a localized cell death agent, used to target and eat aggressive brain tumors without radiation. But it mutated in the animal trials. It didn't just eat the tumors. It ate everything. It hyperaccelerates necrosis in the nervous system. How long? Miller asked. From direct blood contact? Conrad looked at the bandage on my neck. 72 hours.
At best.
The first 24 are asymptomatic, mostly. Then the nervous system starts misfiring. Hallucinations. Loss of motor control. Then liquefaction of the brain stem. I closed my eyes. The phantom itch was no longer phantom. It was real. And the kid? I nodded toward Jackson. He was holding it. If he had a microabrasion on his hand. Conrad flinched. I know. Is there a cure? Miller pressed. Conrad hesitated. That hesitation was everything I needed to know. There is, I said, opening my eyes. If you were developing a weapon or a treatment, you wouldn't keep live samples in your home safe unless you also had the inhibitor. Where is it? It's not that simple, Conrad snapped. The inhibitor is unstable. We only have a handful of viable doses at the primary underground facility, and I can't get to them if I'm locked in a police precinct. Suddenly, the heavy metal door of the interrogation room hissed. The locks disengaged with a heavy clack. Miller grabbed his gun, aiming it at the door. The door swung open, but it wasn't the police. It wasn't the CDC. 3 men in matte black, pressurized hazmat suits stepped into the room. They didn't wear police badges. They wore the sleek, silver cross logo of Mercy Hill Medical Group. They were carrying suppressed, short-barreled rifles. Mr. Hughes, the lead man said, his voice metallic through the suit's respirator. Extraction team is here. The local authorities have been pacified. Miller stood up. Pacified? What the hell does that mean? Drop your weapons now. The lead hazmat trooper didn't even flinch. He raised his rifle and fired.
Uffed.
A dart embedded itself in Miller's neck. The detective gasped, his eyes rolling back into his head, and collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut.
No.
I shouted, trying to stand, but the room spun violently. My legs gave out, and I hit the floor hard. Grab the boy and the wife, Conrad ordered, stepping over Miller's unconscious body without a second glance. And grab that piece of trash too, he added, pointing at me. Sir? The trooper asked. Standard protocol is termination of exposed liabilities. Do you know how rare it is to have a live, human subject infected via direct arterial puncture? Conrad's eyes were completely devoid of humanity now. The terrified father was gone. The ruthless tycoon was back. He's a walking data point. Bring him to sublevel 4. We'll extract his cerebral fluid as the pathogen progresses. It might be the key to stabilizing the inhibitor. A pair of heavy, rubberized hands grabbed me by the shoulders. I tried to fight, but whatever strain 73 was doing to my blood, it was draining my strength. I felt a sharp prick in my arm, a sedative. As darkness pulled me under, the last thing I saw was Vanessa screaming as the troopers dragged her out, her Hermes bag abandoned on the bloody linoleum floor. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the smell of ozone. My eyes fluttered open, but everything was smeared with a faint, pulsing red glow. I blinked hard, clearing my vision. I was strapped to a steel medical table, angled upright at 45 degrees. Thick leather restraints bound my wrists, chest, and ankles. I was inside a perfectly cylindrical glass room. Outside the glass, the environment was pure, sterile white, a high-tech laboratory filled with centrifuges, glowing monitors, and people in full biohazard gear. I tested the restraints. They didn't give an inch. Save your energy. I turned my head. To my right, sitting on the floor within the glass cell, was Detective Miller. He wasn't strapped down, but he looked like hell. His shirt was torn, and his face was bruised. Miller? I croaked. My voice sounded metallic in my own ears. You're alive. For now, Miller grunted, standing up and leaning against the glass. He tapped it. Polycarbonate. 3 inches thick. We aren't breaking out of here. Where are we? Mercy Hill. Sublevel 4, apparently. Conrad's private playground, Miller said, spitting a glob of blood onto the pristine white floor of the cell. They bought off the precinct. Told the mayor's office it was a contained chemical spill and that Mercy Hill's private hazmat division was handling it pro bono. The whole city thinks we're quarantined at a hospital getting top-tier care. How long was I out? 18 hours, Miller said softly. Panic surged through me, a cold spike into my heart. 18 hours.
Plus the time at the precinct.
I was over 24 hours in. The asymptomatic window was closing. As if on cue, a sharp, stabbing pain erupted behind my left eye. I gasped, arching my back against the steel table. It felt like someone had shoved a hot knitting needle into my optical nerve. Hey, stay with me, Miller yelled, rushing to the side of the table. Breathe. The pain subsided after a few agonizing seconds, leaving me gasping and drenched in cold sweat. It's starting, I panted. The necrosis. A speaker above us crackled to life. Fascinating. I looked up. Beyond the glass, standing at a control console, was Conrad Hughes. He wasn't in a hazmat suit. The glass between us was absolute containment. Beside him stood a team of scientists with clipboards. Pupillary dilation is asymmetrical, Conrad said into a microphone, taking notes. Subject is entering stage 2. Pain receptors are firing randomly. Neural pathways are beginning to degrade. You sick son of a bitch. Miller roared, slamming his fists against the glass. Let him go. Give him the inhibitor. Conrad smiled. It was a cold, clinical thing. I'm afraid I can't do that, detective. The inhibitor is incredibly scarce. We only have 3 viable vials left. I can't waste one on a barista, or whatever it is he does. I need his brain alive as long as possible to chart the degradation. You're a monster, I whispered, the words tearing my throat. I'm a visionary, Conrad corrected. Do you know how much the Department of Defense will pay for a localized, untraceable bioagent that mimics a rapid onset stroke? Billions. Your sacrifice is for the greater good of the American economy. What about your wife? I rasped, leaning forward against the straps. What about your kid? Conrad's smile faltered. A shadow crossed his face. He pressed a button on the console, and a heavy set of blinds raised on the wall behind him, revealing another glass cell across the lab. Inside the second cell was Vanessa. She was not strapped down, but she might as well have been. She was curled into a fetal position on the floor. Her flawless blonde hair was matted with sweat and vomit. She was convulsing violently, scratching at her own arms until they bled. Vanessa was scratched by Jackson earlier that morning. He threw a toy at her. The needle residue was on his hands, Conrad said, his voice losing its clinical detachment, replaced by a hollow, grim reality. She is 36 hours into the infection. Her motor cortex is currently collapsing. And the boy? Miller asked. Jackson is in the pediatric wing, in a medically induced coma. He ingested the pathogen when he bit his nails, Conrad said, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the microphone. He needs the inhibitor, but his body is too small. If I give him the adult dose, his heart will explode. If I dilute it, the pathogen overpowers it. I need the data from your deaths to synthesize a pediatric dose. He looked at me with a terrifying desperation. So, you see, you're going to die. But you're going to save my son. The intercom clicked off. Conrad turned his back to us and walked away, disappearing down a sterile, white corridor. I slumped back against the metal table. The hopelessness was heavier than the leather straps. I was going to die here. A lab rat for a billionaire psychopath. Hey, Miller whispered, stepping close to the table. Don't check out on me yet. I looked at him. Miller, it's over. He has the cure. He has the guns. We're in a fishbowl. I'm a cop, kid. I've been on the force for 30 years, Miller said, his eyes scanning the ceiling of our glass cage. You think I let them drag me out of that precinct without a fight? You think they just threw me in here because they felt generous? I frowned, the fog in my brain clearing slightly. What do you mean? Miller reached into his mouth. He grimaced, digging his fingers toward his back teeth. With a sickening pop, he pulled out a molar. No, not a molar. A hollow, titanium cap. From the cap, he extracted a tiny, coiled piece of metal, a lockpick. They searched me, stripped me, took my piece, my phone, my radio, Miller said with a grim smile. But they didn't check my dental work. I took a bullet to the jaw in '98. Got a lot of fake teeth. He moved to my right wrist and began working the heavy metal buckle of the leather restraint with a tiny pick. What's the plan? I whispered, a spark of adrenaline fighting back the virus. We get out of these straps. We're still in a glass box. Look at the air vents, Miller said, nodding upward as the buckle on my right wrist clicked open. He moved to the left. This is a level 4 biocontainment cell. That means negative air pressure. The air flows in, not out. But to maintain the vacuum, there's a heavy-duty exhaust fan at the top, filtered through HEPA and UV scrubbers. We can't fit through a vent. We don't need to, Miller said, freeing my left arm. I observed the guard rotation while you were napping. Every 4 hours, they come in to take a blood sample from Vanessa. When they open her door, the system temporarily equalizes the pressure. For exactly 10 seconds, the electronic lock on our door is vulnerable because the system routes all power to the decontamination airlocks. He finished undoing my legs. I slid off the table, my legs buckling.
Miller caught me.
You good? He asked. I feel like I drank battery acid, I muttered, gritting my teeth. But I can walk. Good. Because when that pressure equalizes, I'm going to short-circuit the door panel from the inside. We'll have about a 3-second window to push through before the lockdown resets. How are you going to short a panel with a lockpick? Miller grinned, pointing to the heart monitor I had been strapped to. I'm going to use the defibrillator. We spent the next 20 minutes ripping the heavy defibrillator unit off the medical cart. I stripped the wires with my teeth while Miller pried off the plastic casing of the electronic lock on the inside of our glass door. My hands were shaking violently. Stage 2 was progressing. My vision kept flashing with blinding bursts of static, and my hearing felt like I was underwater. Time was running out. "Here they come," Miller whispered. Through the glass, I saw two guards in heavy hazmat suits approach Vanessa's cell. One of them held a key card to the scanner. "Get ready with the live wires," Miller instructed, holding the exposed panel open. The guard swiped the card. A heavy green light flashed above Vanessa's cell. Hiss. The pressure in the room shifted. My ears popped.
Now,
Miller yelled. I jammed the exposed, live wires of the defibrillator into the motherboard of the lock and hit the charge/shock button.
crack.
A shower of blue sparks exploded from the panel. The glass door shuddered, the magnetic seal frying instantly. Miller threw his entire body weight against the heavy polycarbonate. The door gave way. We tumbled out of the cell and onto the pristine white floor of the main laboratory. Alarms instantly blared. Not the precinct alarm, but a blaring, deafening klaxon. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a strobe effect. The two guards at Vanessa's cell spun around, dropping their equipment and reaching for the sidearms strapped to their thighs. Miller was faster. He didn't have a gun, but he had 30 years of street fighting experience. He grabbed a heavy metal centrifuge off a nearby lab bench and hurled it like a shot put. It caught the first guard square in the chest, cracking his visor and sending him sprawling. I scrambled to my feet, my blood boiling with viral fever and pure rage. The second guard drew his weapon and aimed at Miller. I didn't think. I grabbed a glass beaker full of some clear, acidic solution and threw it directly at the guard's helmet. The glass shattered, the liquid splattering across his visor. It didn't burn through the heavy plastic, but it blinded him for a split second. Miller closed the distance, grabbed the guard's wrist, twisted it sharply, and snapped it. The gun clattered to the floor. Miller caught it midair, pressed the barrel to the guard's kneecap, and fired. The crack of the gunshot was deafening. The guard screamed, collapsing. Miller scooped up the second gun and tossed it to me. Know how to use it? Safety's off. Point and pull, I said, my hands trembling as I gripped the heavy Glock. Close enough. Let's move. We need to find the cold storage vault. We ran down the corridor where Conrad had disappeared. The facility was massive, a subterranean labyrinth of glass, steel, and flashing red lights. Panicked scientists in lab coats were scrambling, trying to evacuate as the breach alarms wailed. We ignored them, pushing deeper into the heart of Mercy Hill. My body was failing. My left leg was dragging, the motor control slipping away. I leaned heavily against the wall, leaving a trail of bloody handprints from where my forehead ripped out. Keep moving, Miller urged, supporting my weight. We're close. The vault should be in the central hub. We burst through a set of double doors and found ourselves in a massive, circular command center. In the middle of the room stood a heavily armored, walk-in freezer with a vault door. Standing in front of the vault was Conrad Hughes. He was holding a steel briefcase. Flanking him were 4 heavily armed security contractors. They weren't wearing hazmat suits. They wore tactical vests and night vision goggles. Elite mercenaries. Stop right there. Conrad barked, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. Shoot them. Miller and I dove behind a massive bank of computer servers just as the mercenaries opened fire. The deafening roar of automatic weapons filled the room. Sparks rained down on us as bullets shredded the server racks, destroying monitors and raining glass onto our heads. We're pinned, Miller yelled over the gunfire. I peeked around the edge of the server. Conrad was furiously punching a code into the vault door. He was trying to get the rest of the inhibitor, or maybe destroy it, so we couldn't have it. Miller, I gasped, the world spinning. He's got the briefcase. That's got to be the cure. I only have 6 rounds left. Miller checked his magazine. I can't take down 4 guys in body armor with a handgun. I looked at my own gun. I had a full mag, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Then I noticed something. Above the vault, running along the ceiling, was a massive network of pipes labeled liquid nitrogen, cooling system. Miller, I pointed a trembling finger at the pipes. The cooling lines. Shoot the junction. Miller followed my gaze. A grim smile spread across his face. Smart kid. He leaned out from cover, ignoring the hail of bullets whizzing past his head. He took careful aim, breathing out slowly, and fired 3 rapid shots.
Clang. Clang.
PSSSHHHHH. The massive, high-pressure junction pipe ruptured. A torrential wave of supercooled liquid nitrogen blasted downward, exploding into the room like a localized blizzard. The temperature dropped to sub-zero in a fraction of a second. The mist was thick, blinding, and suffocating. The mercenaries screamed as the freezing gas hit their exposed skin. 2 of them dropped their weapons, clutching their faces as frostbite set in instantaneously. Move, Miller yelled. We charged through the freezing fog. One of the mercenaries blindly swung his rifle. Miller ducked under the barrel and drove the butt of his pistol into the man's temple, knocking him out cold. I fired a blind shot toward another shadowy figure. The man shrieked and fell clutching his leg. I burst through the mist and slammed directly into Conrad Hughes. We both tumbled to the floor. The briefcase slid out of his grasp, skittering across the icy tiles. Conrad scrambled for it, but I kicked him hard in the ribs. He groaned, rolling onto his back. I dove for the briefcase, grabbing the handle just as Conrad's hand closed around my ankle. "You are not taking that," Conrad screamed, his face purple with rage. He yanked my leg, pulling me backward. I spun around, aiming the Glock directly at his face. "Let go," I rasped, blood dripping from my nose. The virus was causing hemorrhaging now. Conrad froze. He looked at the gun, then at my face. He saw the broken blood vessels in my eyes, the pale, sweat-drenched skin. He saw a dead man holding a gun. "You pull that trigger, you'll never get the code to the briefcase," Conrad sneered, trying to regain his power. "You need me." "No, he doesn't," Miller's voice rang out from the fog. Miller stepped forward, holding one of the mercenaries' assault rifles. He pointed it at the digital lock of the briefcase and pulled the trigger. A short burst of fire shattered the locking mechanism into twisted metal and plastic. I kicked the lid open. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were 3 glass vials filled with a glowing, amber liquid. The inhibitor. 3 doses. I grabbed one. My hands were shaking so violently, I almost dropped it. I grabbed an auto-injector syringe from the case, jammed the vial into the slot, and pressed it against my thigh. Hiss. The amber liquid shot into my muscle. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, it felt like liquid fire had been injected directly into my veins. I screamed, arching my back as every nerve ending in my body flared with agonizing pain. The inhibitor was violently stripping the pathogen from my cells. I collapsed onto the floor, dry heaving, gasping for air. Slowly, the burning faded. The static in my vision cleared. The yellow tint vanished. I lay on the cold tiles, staring up at the ceiling, panting. I was alive. Miller grabbed the second vial and slipped it into his pocket. Conrad scrambled to his feet, lunging for the briefcase. "That's mine. Give it to me. My son needs it." Miller hit him in the chest with the butt of the rifle, sending Conrad sprawling backward onto the floor. "There's 1 vial left, Conrad," Miller said coldly, pointing the rifle at the billionaire. "1 dose." Conrad stared at the final vial in the case. Then he looked up at us, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. "Please," Conrad begged, his voice cracking. The great tycoon was finally on his knees. "Please. My son. And my wife. Vanessa needs it.
She's dying.
Jackson is dying." I slowly got to my feet. The weakness was still there, but the rot had stopped. I walked over to the briefcase, looking down at the last vial. "You said it yourself, Conrad," I whispered, echoing the words he had spoken in the interrogation room. "Accidents happen. Boys play rough. I'll give you anything," Conrad screamed, tears streaming down his face. "Money. Power. I'll sign the company over to you. Just give me the vial." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had authorized the creation of a weapon that would liquidate human brains. The man who was perfectly willing to let me die in a glass box to collect data. The man whose wife had laughed when her son stabbed me. I reached into the case and picked up the last vial. Conrad held out his trembling hands. I looked at the vial, then handed it to Miller. "Detective," I said, my voice steady. "We need this as evidence for the FBI, to prove what Mercy Hill was manufacturing." Conrad let out an animalistic howl. He lunged at me, clawing, spitting, crying.
No. No.
"You can't. They'll die." Miller grabbed Conrad by the collar, throwing him face first against the heavy steel vault door, and slapped a pair of tactical zip ties onto his wrists. "You're under arrest, Mr. Hughes." Miller read him his rights, his voice echoing over Conrad's frantic, broken sobbing. "For kidnapping, domestic terrorism, and the illegal manufacture of biological weapons. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you will." I looked down at the briefcase. I felt a pang of something, maybe guilt, maybe pity, for the 7-year-old boy lying in a coma. But then I remembered the feral grin on Jackson's face in the theater. I remembered Vanessa's mocking laugh. "It's not like it's poisoned or anything. Don't be a drama queen." I turned my back on Conrad Hughes and walked toward the exit. The aftermath was a media firestorm that made the national news look like a local bake sale. When Miller and I finally breached the surface, dragging a blubbering, broken Conrad Hughes with us, we bypassed the local precinct entirely. Miller had an old buddy in the FBI's counterterrorism unit. We drove straight to the federal building. The moment we handed over the inhibitor, the blood samples, and the stolen hard drives from Sublevel 4, the dominoes fell. Federal agents raided Mercy Hill Medical Group. They found the illegal sublevels. They found the data on strain 73. And they found the glass cells. Vanessa Hughes didn't make it. Without the inhibitor, stage 3 progressed exactly as Conrad had charted. Her brain stem liquefied 48 hours after we escaped. Jackson Hughes survived, but only just. The CDC managed to reverse engineer a crude, diluted version of the inhibitor from the evidence we provided, but it was too late to stop the neurological damage. He woke from his coma permanently paralyzed from the waist down, his vocal cords irreparably damaged. He would never throw a tantrum in a movie theater again. Conrad's empire crumbled to dust. His assets were frozen, his accounts seized. He is currently sitting in a federal supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, awaiting trial for crimes against humanity. They keep him in solitary confinement. I hear he spends his days staring at the wall, muttering chemical formulas to himself. As for me, I received a multi-million-dollar settlement from the federal government's Victim Compensation Fund, carved directly out of Mercy Hill's liquidated assets. I don't serve coffee anymore. I bought a cabin in the Pacific Northwest, far away from the city, far away from movie theaters, and far away from people. The physical scars healed. The puncture wound on my neck faded to a small, white crescent moon. But some nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the cabin is dead silent, I can still feel a phantom burning in my veins. I wake up in a cold sweat, swatting at my neck, half expecting to see a terrified billionaire standing over me with a clipboard. And then I look at my bank account, pour myself a glass of very expensive bourbon, and go back to sleep. I had told Vanessa that if the needle was dirty, God himself couldn't save her. I was wrong. God had nothing to do with it. It was just me, Miller, and the cold, hard reality of consequence. They thought they were untouchable, safe in their ivory tower, playing with lives as if they were toys. But gravity is a funny thing. The higher you build the tower, the harder you hit the concrete when it finally falls.